Hello, how's everybody doing this morning? Good to see you. Welcome to class. Hi, folks. Hi, Hayden. It's good to see everybody today. Welcome to class. Got about 16 viewers here. Not a bad morning, a little quiet. We're 3 weeks into this. Hope everybody's doing well. Good morning, Danya, Nicole. It's good to see you, Aiden. Welcome, everybody. Fantastic. I hope your semester's going well. I hope this week is starting off well. Anybody got anything interesting to share with the class? Hi, Harrison. Good to see you, Morgan. What's up? Fantastic. 19 people. Okay. Good deal. 22. Class is spinning up towards a nice size here. Wow, we've got almost a whole classroom full of people right here on YouTube. I've adjusted the color of my background. I'm now going with the most elegant shade of blue. Some of you may know it as Tar Heel blue. So I hope you like my color, you state fans. Any Carolina fans out there with me? Come on, help me out. Fellow Tar Heels. The Vanished. Yep, Riley sent me a text about that. I'm going to have to watch that. Stayed all the way. Good for you, Maya. Yeah, Riley, if you want to type in the chat bar and tell us a little bit about it, that'd be interesting. Looks like we're at 11:01, so I'm going to go ahead and get started now, if you don't mind. So today we're going to be talking about Chapter 3, which relates to consciousness. We're going to talk a little bit about consciousness in the general terms today, and then we're going to talk specifically about one form of consciousness change that we all go through on Thursday, and that's going to be sleeping and dreaming. So today we're going to talk about different states of consciousness, and then on in the general idea of studying consciousness, and then on Thursday we'll talk about sleeping and dreaming. Okay, I say okay. Holy cow, 33 students. Fantastic. All right, so what we're going to talk about today is I'm going to define consciousness, talk a little bit about the difficulty of studying it. We're going to introduce the global workspace model of consciousness as one explanation of how consciousness occurs. And we're going to talk a little bit about split brain patients, and then we're going to talk about altered states of consciousness, specifically meditation, hypnosis, and my favorite state of altered consciousness, flow, or being in the pocket, so to speak. Okay, so consciousness is super difficult to define and study. If you look through the history and philosophy of the history of the philosophical study of consciousness, what you're going to find is that most of the time philosophers can't even agree on what consciousness is. It seems like a slippery concept, and the weird thing is, in order to describe consciousness, you kind of have to use consciousness in the definition, which is a little bit circular. You wouldn't understand consciousness unless you've had consciousness, and then really it needs no explanation. But if we're going to study something scientifically, we need to define it. And so consciousness is a really weird thing, that a state of brain activity. We know it's related to the cerebral cortex, the newest part of your brain. Okay, and the question is, to what degree do animals possess consciousness? Well, first we have to define what consciousness is and understand it. But it's really difficult to know where the dividing line between those people who are conscious and those people who are not conscious, where that dividing line between consciousness and unconsciousness is put, where that line is. Now, one of the things we do know that consciousness, this sort of this awareness that we have, seems to have four kinds of qualities. You know, you all know things. We have memories, things that happen to us, things, yeah, you know, your biography in a sense. But at the same time, we also have a phenomenological experience of the world. You folks know what things you like, what things you don't. When you hear a pleasant melody, it makes you feel good. When you taste something that tastes nasty, you have sort of an emotional, visceral reaction to it. So consciousness also seems to involve this sort of experiencing of events too. It's an introspection, because not only do we know things and do we have feelings, but we can actually think about these experiences. So consciousness sort of has this introspective experience too. And we also tend to think of intentionality and free will as a part of consciousness. And so it's sort of all of these things. Somebody out there the other day was asking me if we all experienced red and green the same way. You know what? That's what we call the hard problem in consciousness. Nobody really exactly knows if we all experience the same world. I can't get inside your mind. You can't get inside my mind. So the weird thing is, we will never know from a phenomenological standpoint whether or not we all taste the same thing when we taste an orange or drink a glass of milk. We'll never know because consciousness is phenomenological. It's individual. Each and every one of us experiences our own reality that nobody else will ever really know. That's sort of the hard problem. Now, what you might call the easy problem is trying to define exactly what processes are related to consciousness, and maybe we can even start to figure out where in the brain this occurs. Now, this is still hard, but it's much easier in comparison to the idea of trying to understand why people like the color blue, or what makes ice cream better than liver. Okay. Yes, that's exactly what it is, Dania. It's yeah, it's individual. It's unique to each and every one of us, and so it's really hard to ever know anything about the real experience of reality that we each have. Now, I've got some videos that I'm going to show you this week that will mainly talk about the process of consciousness. In fact, there's a video in your resources folder. It's a part of your weekly discussion, and we'll be talking about it in the webinar by Anil Seth, and he asks the question, do we hallucinate our reality? And in his TED Talk, he presents a really strong case that what we think of as reality is nothing but a shared hallucination that we all have. So please watch that video before you come to the webinar so we can talk about that. Yeah, well, there you go. See? And that's the phenomenological problem, Riley. I hate liver with a passion, right? But I do like collard greens, and some of you probably don't like collard greens. It does sound like the Matrix, Hayden, yes. Yeah, this consciousness is kind of that weird matrixy sort of stuff. Now, the weird thing is, philosophers and neurophilosophers, I should say, have asked the question, really have fallen into two camps. One being dualism, is that we have a mind, some sort of thing that doesn't have any substance or any dimensionality to it, a soul, if you will. And then we have a body and a brain that is controlled by that mind, that sort of potential, non-physical potential, if you will. This is called dualism sometimes, championed by a fellow named Rene Descartes back in the 18th century, who thought that there was a soul that connected with the body through this gland in the brain, the only part of your brain that doesn't have two structures, the pineal gland. And he thought that your soul controlled your body through your pineal gland. And so dualism sort of posits that maybe we ought to think about the mind as separate from the body. And then other psychologists like the idea of what we might call simple. Hello, can you hear me now? Can you folks hear me now? Okay. Go ahead and refresh. All right. Fantastic. My sound's going to be impaired. I dropped my wireless mic, and for some reason that cut off my sound. Can you hear me well? How's the sound quality? I apologize for that. Okay. So here's the weird thing. And so there's a branch of psychology called neurophilosophy that is actually interested in trying to merge neuroscience with these philosophical questions about the mind. It's actually better than before? Oh, okay. Well, then maybe we'll go with this better. Okay, great. Now, here's the weird thing about this idea of consciousness. If you'll see these graphs I have here, it turns out that it's really difficult to measure consciousness other than asking people what they think and what they feel, right? And you're sort of right in the middle of what it is you're trying to study. But they have these really cool experiments that show, do we really have free will? What they find is that people's brains begin to activate before they even have the intention to do something. So before I decide to lift my hand, a part of my brain starts getting that part of my brain ready. Do you understand that? It's kind of weird. It's almost as if your brain becomes active before you know you are going to do something. So if you look at these graphs up here in this picture, the person has an intention to act, and then they act. So what people do is they come in and they report the moment they're getting ready to move their hand, and then they move their hand. Well, it turns out if you measure their EEG, their brain electricity, if you measure their single cells, or if you measure neurotransmitter functioning, what happens is the brain begins to act even before you are aware that you want to move something. Your body begins moving something. Okay? What's blurry? Yes, and it would be stimulated as you decide not to. Try changing. Which part is blurry? The model or me? The image or me? All of it. Really? Okay, hold on just a minute. How about this picture? Is this picture blurry? Okay, so it might be other people who are having quality problems. I'll go back and look at that. Check, see what you have selected if you're seeing it. Just go to settings and change it to 8. Can't read the picture. Okay, I think we might have user error, but this is a nice experiment to sort of figure out what's going wrong. All right, so here's the deal. In line with sort of a monistic model is this idea of the global workspace model. Now, one theory of how consciousness arises is that you have different parts of your brain. Remember we talked about modularity, different parts of your brain that sense different things? And the idea of the consciousness of the workspace model is that really we can think of consciousness as whatever part of your brain happens to be engaged at that particular point. So we know that we have a frontal lobe that is responsible for making plans and intentions. So when you're thinking about your plans and intentions and they're in your mind, your frontal lobe is active. When you're moving and in movement, dancing, playing, or thinking about your arms, your primary motor cortex is moving. If you see something and you consciously see something, your occipital lobe is active. And if you look at these different brain areas, what you're going to notice is that there are major pathways that connect your prefrontal cortex to your anterior temporal lobe that connects to your medial parietal lobe. And so, okay. What do you mean about singing? You're talking about singing. That's an interesting question. You're probably talking about your Broca's area, Wernicke's area, your motor cortex would all be involved in that, Hyatt. And also not only your left cortex, but your right cortex. It's going to use a lot of parts. I forget the name you wanted to be called, Hyatt, you told me, and I'll have to remember that. But it actually is going to involve lots of different parts, Hyatt. It's going to involve your vocal. It's going to involve your acoustic processing center so you can hear your sound. It's going to involve the right half of your brain and the left half of your brain. Fantastic. Okay, thanks, Jesse. All right. Now, there's evidence for the global workspace model. If you look at the image over here on the left, you'll notice that there's a picture of a house, which is an object. There's a picture of a face, and then there's a superimposed picture that has the two of them. Now, we know that when people see faces, their fusiform gyrus activates. When people look at houses and other objects, their medial temporal lobe activates. So what they do is they ask people to look at a superimposed picture with these two objects. And you know what? Some people are going to look at this object and see the face. Some people are going to look at this picture and see the object. And what scientists find is that when people report seeing the face, their temporal lobe is active. When people look at this superimposed picture and see the house, their anterior temporal lobe activates. And so what this suggests is that consciousness is created by whatever part of your brain happens to be active. Now, here's the weird thing. Don't get into the idea of thinking that there's a part of your brain that controls and puts all of these. So you don't have a control center in your brain saying, go to vision now, go to touch now, all right? Because that's the problem of what Gilbert Ryle called the ghost in the machine, all right? At some point, it all has to reduce down, if you will, to some sort of brain area making a move on its own. And think of consciousness as sort of your perception of these events working semi-simultaneously. All right. Now, one of the neat things about consciousness is its limited nature. So when people are focused around, you have just a little bit of conscious awareness that you can actually think of things. Now, it turns out that human beings process stuff consciously, and they also process stuff subconsciously, right? So you folks have probably heard of subliminal messaging, and subliminal messaging has minor, moderate effects. but we have very little bandwidth to actually pay attention to things. As a body's way of saying we are overloaded. You know what, Aish? That is a good point. Human beings have a certain amount of bandwidth that they can use. And human beings do feel overwhelmed and overstimulated sometime. Absolutely, Aish. When you overwhelm that ability to process. Now, I sent you a video about the basketball players earlier today. Did any of you watch the passes? How many passes did the team in white make? Hi, Fatima. It's good to see you. 13. But how many of you saw the bear? How many of you missed the bear? Okay. What researchers, this is what we called inattentional blindness. It turns out about half the people who watch this video miss the moonwalking bear. Why would you miss a bear moonwalking through a bunch of people playing basketball? How could you possibly miss that? Edda already answered it. She was busy counting. She was focusing. The weird thing about consciousness is that you can focus it in given areas, and we call this paying attention. And the weird thing, Aish, yes, Aish, a lot of times it's because you are not looking for it. You're not expecting to see it. You're not processing that information. You folks were looking at white jackets and a basketball. You were completely ignoring stuff that was in black, the players in black, and also the black bear that walked through the scene. Absolutely, right? And so the weird thing about consciousness is we know that it's very limited. In fact, in chapter 7, I'm going to talk about a model of the mind where we suggest that you have a preconscious part of your brain that selects what you are going to pay attention to at any given time. All right. And so when you folks look at words, a lot of times you don't pay attention to the color of the ink. Instead, you read the meaning of the words because your selective attention has decided to keep some things in your conscious awareness and let other things out of your conscious awareness. Another example of this is in this chart that I'm showing you right now. That you're looking at on the screen, the change blindness studies. They do this really crazy experiment where a person goes up and asks directions from a stranger. And as they're asking directions, two people walk by with a big painting right between the person and the stranger they're asking directions to. And as this painting crosses in front, they switch people asking directions. And the question is, will a person know if the person they are talking to changes? And it turns out that about half the time, people miss a change from one person to another, especially when they don't change gender, right? And so it's weird how you do feel like you would notice the difference right away. You know what? If any of you with a store clip, even when the race and gender was changed, absolutely, it can happen. You know, if you want to test this notion, Riley, there are a bunch of change blindness videos on there where they will have a scene. It's really crazy how they do this. They'll have a scene. Usually it's like a murder mystery, and you'll have two people walking around a room, and they'll show you how they do it. And as the camera pans around, people come in and change things in the scene. So you'll be looking at a table with a red tablecloth, and they'll scan over to another part of the room, and when you come back, the tablecloth is now blue. And the question is, can you notice the change? And when you watch these videos, it's absolutely impossible to do that. You got to try that out, Riley. Okay, so one way we study consciousness is this idea of change. It appears to be this limited thing that we have, right? And when we focus on things, we actually, in a sense, become oblivious to parts of a world. Imagine being blind to things happening in your world because you've focused your consciousness. So that's one way we talk about consciousness. Now, this idea of consciousness being distributed is demonstrated by split brain patients and the design of the dual hemisphere brain. Now, it turns out you have a left hemisphere and you have a right hemisphere of your brain. Whenever you feel your right arm, it is your left brain that feels me touching your right arm. Whenever I touch your left arm, your right brain feels that arm. So you have this contralateral design where your left hemisphere of your brain, left side of your brain controls the right side of your body, and where the right side of your brain controls and feels the left side of your body. Now, here's the crazy thing. Think of your eyes as muscles too, and divide your visual world into a left half and a right half. The right half of your brain sees the left half of your world, and the left half of your brain consciously sees the right half of your world. Okay, does that make sense? Now, it turns out that the left half of your brain is verbal and can talk. The right half of your brain is nonverbal. It can do things, but it can't talk. Okay, it can see facial emotions, but it doesn't understand words and it can't talk. Now, you have this thing we talked about last week called the corpus callosum, and that is the connection that allows your left half of your brain to connect to your right half of your brain and to talk, right? Now, in the early days, in the 60s, one of the treatments they had for people with seizures was what's known as a commissurotomy. They would cut that corpus callosum right in half. It stops the spread of electrical firing, and it minimizes and decreases the frequency of seizures. However, the weird thing happens is this causes these bizarro sensory conscious effects in people. And it turns out that if you take a person who has a split brain and you have them stare at a dot in the middle of a screen and flash something up on the left side of their brain, on the left side of their field of vision, it'll go to their right brain and they won't be able to tell you what they're looking at. However, if you ask them to point to the tool that they would use for that object, they'll be able to point at a related object. So they'll be able to do it. They'll know what they're looking at, but they won't be able to talk to you. Does that make sense? And on the other hand, if you show that person something in the right field of vision and it goes to their left brain, they'll be able to tell you what it is they saw. Okay, so they do this really cool experiment with split brain patients. So you see the person who has a split brain right here. They're staring at that screen. You'll notice right in the middle of that screen is a black dot. A black dot. Now, if they stare at that black dot, what happens is the house on the left side of their screen goes to the right part of their brain. And what goes in the right part of their screen goes to their left brain. Okay? Now, if you ask this split brain person to point with their hands at objects that are related to what they see on the screen, their left hand will point to the which is controlled by the right half of the brain, will point to the shovel, which is on the left half of the screen. And the person's right hand, which is controlled by the left brain that sees the chicken foot, will point to the chicken. And so the weird thing is, consciousness is sort of your ability to have a full conscious experience. It depends not only on your eyes or your ears, but the fact that your ears on each side work together, your eyes on each side work together. You thought that was a tree trunk, not a chicken foot. Okay, I got to make the images bigger. So, and the weird thing is your right hemisphere is not verbal. Okay, your right hemisphere sort of understands facial expressions. So can you tell me, am I happy or sad? Am I happy or sad? Am I happy or sad? Exactly, Spencer, right? Surprise, boom, Tania knew it was surprised. You know what? That's the right part of your brain. It's not verbal, but it sees facial experiences. And the left half of your brain is verbal and it hears words. So when somebody tells you a dirty joke, the left half of your brain gets the grammar, the right half of your brain gets the dirty. And in order for you to have a full conscious experience, these two halves of your brain actually have to work together. And yes, you were definitely right with surprised. It was a trick question. I asked you if I was happy or I was afraid, and you folk happy or sad, and you folks actually knew it was neither, right? Okay, now there are different altered states of consciousness, so one form of an altered state of consciousness is meditation. And I don't know if any of you have tried meditation before, but here's a quote from the Buddhist scripture: "The mind is like a fish out of water that thrashes and throws itself about, its thoughts following each of its cravings. Such a mind is unsteady. To calm them is the true way of happiness. Putting a bridle on the wandering mind, single-mindedly the practitioner restrains her thoughts. She contains their darting waywardness and finds peace." How many of you have a busy mind that you just can't seem to stop? Wow, we have some meditators in class. I've tried meditating. It is so hard, which is probably why I need to keep doing it. But I have a very, very busy mind, especially sometimes when I'm not around anybody and I'm just thinking. Anybody ever have a busy mind when you jog and all you do is think about all the stuff of the day? Do you really, when you are thinking like that, do you think about good things or do you think about bad things? What usually takes, when your mind starts wandering, do you know, is it good things or bad things? Absolutely. Minds wander. That's what they do. And so meditation is the practice of controlling the activity of the mind. Most of the time, right? So meditation is simply a practice of controlling the natural tendency of the mind to be busy. All right. Now, it's an altered state of consciousness, and the practice is learning how to control your attention. You yoke or control the mind. And there's different kinds of meditation. Sometimes you'll meditate on a word or a phrase. Sometimes you'll do, I forget, was it transcendental meditation where you let thoughts come into your mind, but you don't focus on them? You let them float out the other side. Or sometimes you do what's called loving kindness meditation, where you just think good thoughts about people you like or you don't like, and you just focus on that one thing. And the whole idea of transcendental meditation or loving kindness meditation or any of these others is what you're trying to do is you're trying to slow down the activity of a mind at rest. Right? Now, the research says that regular practice of meditation is associated with improvement in health measures. Your blood pressure goes down, cholesterol level goes down, glucose levels decrease. It decreases the experience of stress, sadness, and depression. There is a lot of research to suggest that regular meditation is a very helpful thing. You know what? You can even engage in religious meditation. In fact, religion, there are a lot of positive health qualities that come along with a religious practice. So there's even religious meditation. Ooh, Dania lets it out by journaling. I like that. That's a great strategy. Now, here's the weird thing. It turns out that brains, Hans Berger, the Nazi scientist that invented the EEG, was absolutely shocked to learn that minds did not rest ever. Okay, minds are always active. Brains are always active. Now, we might think that your brain is only active when you're focused on something and doing something, but even if you're sitting there being quiet, your brain is working. Just a different part of your brain is working. Yes, worship music and instrumental. So the weird thing is you have this brain circuit that really isn't active when you're doing something, all right? It's what we call the default mode network or the task negative network. And it turns out that we have these strategies in these areas in our brain that become more active when we are at rest. And people who have activity in the default mode network tend to report thinking about themselves, tend to report thinking about the past, and tend to report thinking about others. And typically the content of these thoughts is relatively negative. So the default mode network is a part of your brain that's active when you're not focused, but it kind of leads you to sad emotional spots. And so what's useful about meditation is you can learn to slow down the activity in this particular network, which leads to those sad and depressed and anxious feelings that we have. All right. Now, hypnosis is another form of consciousness. It's a form of consciousness that is created by a social interaction during which a person responds to suggestions and experiences a temporary change in memory and perception. People are not faking it. They're not faking it. The question is it a real state of altered consciousness? People who become hypnotized aren't trying to become part of the act. They're not playing a role. They're not pretending to be hypnotized. They are really hypnotized. But the question is, are they a part of a social interaction where their behavior is being coaxed? Or is their brain activity qualitatively different from normal consciousness? Now, there are two theories on what happens when people now it turns out not everyone, can be hypnotized. Turns out if you don't want to be hypnotized, you can't be hypnotized. People who are creative, people who daydream a lot are much easier to hypnotize than people who are not like that. And in fact, it turns out that it's really not so much the hypnotist quality as your hypnotizability that really determines your hypnotic experience. Okay? You have to let it take you, and some people are unwilling to let it take you, Spencer. Absolutely. Yes, praying is a form of meditation as well, Lydia. Yes. Anything that allows you to sort of calm your busy mind. Listening to meditational music, praying, meditating on a word, meditating on an object, focusing. The idea is that you're controlling or yoking your mind. All right. Now, there are two theories on why people become hypnotized. Some people argue that really what happens, I don't know, have you ever been in a social interaction where somebody makes you do something out of social pressure? You're in a situation and it's just what you do in that given situation. Yes, I have been hypnotized, Edda. In fact, that's why I'm a psychologist. I went to science camp in 8th grade, and this guy came, and I took psychology and chemistry, these little science camps, and somebody came in and hypnotized me, and I thought it was so cool that I decided I had to be a psychologist. And that's when I still remember it. I went to Appalachian State that summer. Yep. Not even high school, Zachary. It was middle school, man, when I decided I wanted to be a psychologist because being hypnotized was so cool. Now, the question is, was I playing a role? Did I fall into a role where my brain wasn't changing, where I was just very open to suggestion? There are some people who argue that hypnotism really isn't an altered state of consciousness. Instead, you just get into a social interaction where you are highly open to suggestion. All right. Now, there's other people who argue that hypnotism really is an altered state of consciousness. And they argue that you sort of disassociate from your real consciousness and develop this alternate conscious awareness that can be controlled. So the fact is, people's behavior can be affected and changed in hypnotic states. The question is, are they really in an altered state, or are they just really in a situation that causes them to be open to suggestion? Now, hypnotism has been used to treat people suffering from pain, so they call it hypnotic analgesia, and it has been shown to be moderately, not strongly effective in treating pain. And the neat thing is that when you look at brain MRIs, what you're going to find is that when people are experiencing hypnosis, their brain areas associated with pain, with the experience of pain, become less active. Or any psychoactive drug. Good point, Spencer. Very good point. And finally, I want to talk about my favorite form of altered state of consciousness, which is flow. And that's why I sent you the video of that dude playing bass earlier today. That guy is the most insane bass player I've ever seen. And did you see when he was jamming on the street? He just kind of got into this frenzy, and you could tell his whole mind was about that bass. Okay, that guy was experiencing the state of flow. All right. Now, this Andrei Csikszentmihalyi, a European scientist, became interested in studying painters who would paint for hours and days at a time and would forget to eat and forget to sleep and forget to drink. And he was amazed that people could work themselves into such a state of focus where they could actually forget their basic biological needs. And he became interested in this state he named flow. And he argued that flow is a highly focused, altered state of consciousness when your awareness of yourself and time diminishes due to being completely engrossed in an enjoyable activity. Have any of you ever gotten lost in something? Maybe you were writing a story. Maybe you were drawing a picture. Maybe you were creating a program. Maybe you were doing something that was so engrossing that you kind of lost track of time. Yeah, even a good conversation could be that. Okay, you're experiencing what we call the flow. Athletes call this being in the zone. If you've ever sat around with a good group of musicians who are jamming together, they're all together, they get what's called in the pocket together, man. And they're just tight. And so this is what's known as being in the flow state. When I'm creating lectures and doing my artistic teaching thing, sometimes I lose track of time. I'm having so much fun creating videos and other stuff for you folks. And what we'll do is we'll call that, right, there you go. It needs a little bit of arousal, Brady. You kind of have to be focused and challenged in order to do that. It does happen in a good dance class. Well, this is what some people believe to be an altered state of consciousness, because if you've ever been in this stage, you know that you are kind of in a different mindset. Now, this Csikszentmihalyi
discovered that there appear to be sort of like 6 qualities of people who get into this flow experience. Now, in order to experience flow, what you have to have is a good match between the challenge level and your ability level. Okay, so if your ability level is really low and the challenge level is really high, you won't experience flow. You'll experience anxiety, right? If your skill level is really high and the challenge level is low, you may experience boredom, right? Now, in order to really experience flow, you've got to be kind of good at something, and you've got to be working at something that is sort of challenging to you. So he found that flow experiences tended to occur when people were good at something and being challenged in that thing that they were good at. And he found that there appear to be sort of like 6 experiences. Yes, jazz fusion. Absolutely, Mike. And so there appear to be 6 qualities of the flow experience. So if you've ever been in a state of flow, you know that you have complete concentration. It is easy to focus, man. When I'm doing a crossword puzzle, I get so focused into it that just the whole world drops away. Your action and awareness, it's almost as if you don't really even have to think about what you're doing. It just comes naturally. Sort of action flows out of your body. People lose time and they lose self-awareness, okay? And they do this thing and it just feels good to do this particular activity, right? So I may make $1 million dancing, but I'm doing it because at the moment of dancing, it fills my soul up. And that guy, when he plays music, I'll bet that bass player I sent to you, I'll bet you he makes good money. But I see videos of him, and this guy plays everywhere all day long. Look up Dr. Funk. He plays morning, noon, and night because I think it just feels good to him. And he feels a sense of control because he can work that bass like nobody's business, right? Now, if you've ever been an athlete at peak performance, you know what it means to be in flow when you are just absolutely killing it. When you're absolutely, he vibes with it, when you're absolutely killing it, right? Now, it turns out that there are some people who have more flow experiences than others. And Csikszentmihalyi identified what he called the autotelic personality. And so there are some people who are intrinsically motivated and desire to be stimulated. If you're one of those persons that likes to do things just to do things, and if you like to keep your mind busy and be working on activities, you may be an autotelic personality, and you may be a person who has an easier time experiencing flow than other people. Yeah, it turns out, Edda, when you're super duper focused on a particular activity, to the exception of everything else, it can cause social problems, right? And when we get to talking about psychological disorders, we're going to talk about the disruption of life that some behaviors create, and that is a sign of psychological dysfunction. But let's think about it as being let's think about it from a positive term today. We'll get to the downside of it later. How about that, Edda? Yeah, he did cut his ear. I think that was Van Gogh, right? Ooh, there you go, Morgan. If you can get in the flow, feeling in the flow is the greatest thing ever. Right? So, flow theory has different, if you will, applications. I don't know if you folks have ever heard of Montessori education, but the whole point of Montessori education is that each child engages in activities that they want. So you do things you want, and the idea is that the child will naturally pick things that match their challenge level, because all kids will pick things that stimulate them. And so the teacher's job in the Montessori school is to show each kid how to pick the tool that they've decided they want to play with, or the toy or the learning game. The teacher's there to show the kid and to scaffold them, that is, help them when they're having difficulty. But the kid picks their level of difficulty, their level of challenge, their activity. And that allows the child to develop, so goes the Montessori theory, their full potential, because they're always in a flow state, if you will. Oh, wow, Tara went to a Solomon school. It felt like a charter school, so it was free. So did you enjoy it, Tara? And I'll let her type. You can get in the flow, especially if you're driving in a challenging environment, Riley, maybe at night or on a curvy road, right? Yeah, right. He should join NASCAR. Now, sports psychologists are also interested in helping athletes achieve flow. It turns out you only have so much bandwidth to pay attention to use on functions, and that bandwidth that you give to being to thinking about yourself and to being uptight and being nervous about your performance takes away from your ability to perform. So one of the things that sports psychologists help people do is lose their self-awareness while performing. Don't worry about winning or losing. Don't worry about how you'll think or what people will think or what failure will feel like. Get in the moment is what sports psychologists talk. And that's basically helping people to try to achieve the flow experience. And what it does is it allows people to perform at peak performance. And then musicians, get in the pocket when they really start to click and work together. And if you've ever worked on a team or been in a team where everybody knows their function and everybody works together perfectly and you don't even have to talk because everybody knows their job, you may experience what we call group flow, which is that feeling of being in a high-functioning, awesome group. Okay? Now, so that's what we talked today. I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about consciousness. And I want you to know that consciousness is this weird shifting thing. And it's so weird and shifting, we don't even really know how to measure it. And so to talk about whether or not we all experience the same kind of consciousness is a very difficult, maybe an impossible question to deal with. So instead, we try to talk about the mechanics of how consciousness works. And I suggested to you that one theory is this idea of the global workspace models, that consciousness and the way it shifts from things you hear to things you see to things you think about represents what part of your cerebral cortex is active in any given situation. I suggested to you that split brain patients provide a sort of good demonstration of this global workspace model, because when people's brains get split, bizarre things happens to their conscious experience. And then I wanted to talk to you about what we might consider as altered states of consciousness, which is meditation, hypnosis, and the experience of flow or being in the zone. Now, on Thursday, we're going to talk about sleeping and dreaming. And this week's Neuromatrix contest is going to relate to sleeping and dreaming. The name of the Neuromatrix is Sleeping Beauty this week. So if you want to do well on the Neuromatrix, you need to come to Thursday's lecture and listen to me as we talk about sleep disorders and REM sleep, okay? So, does anybody have any questions for me? Sorry to run on so long. So you folks like the sound right now. Everything sounds good. You're getting a good audio quality from my microphone right now. Okay, fantastic. I thought I needed the headset for the better quality, but I think I'll just go with the microphone that I've got now. Okay, fantastic. If you're coming to class tonight, please try to watch the video by Anil Seth on the hallucination of reality. It is a mind-blowing talk. I promise you will find it absolutely shocking, okay? Hey, until I see you tonight at 8 p.m. or in class again, take care and have a great day.